Jake, it's great to see you today.
Thanks for having me back, Jason.
So, Jake, there's been a lot going on recently within Russia. We've seen that Ukraine has been cranking out one attack after another on the Russian oil refineries. Have you been following that?
Yeah, it seems like there's been a dramatic shift, especially these last 3 or 4 weeks. I can't be anything but suspicious about the timing, given that there was a change in the administration here in the United States. But this is devastating Russia's oil refinery industry. The successful strike, this was last week on the Ryazan facility. Ukraine has been having tremendous success by basically double tapping these refineries. They strike it first one night with a drone swarm, and then they assess what the damage is like. Is the fire still raging? And then they hit it again. So the Ryazan facility, which accounts for something like 4% of Russia's entire oil refining capacity, it's 100% shut down. Russia can't make it operational at this time. On top of this, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I'm losing track. Open source intelligence, I don't think, can even keep up with the scale of these attacks from Ukrainian drones. Deep into Russia, we're talking 800 kilometers, 500 miles, refineries in Tver, refineries east of Moscow. And for refineries, these are massive, sprawling complexes that are spread out in the event there's an accidental fire or explosion. But just from a distance, like we don't have the close-up pictures and videos, but from a distance, it looks like the end of days. These fires are massive to be beholding, and nothing I don't believe can be repaired anytime soon. With these refineries, Russia needs the technicians, the expertise. Obviously, it's going to cost money. They need parts. But I imagine you also need the cooperation of the weather in order to climb and scale and fix these distillation towers. How do you do that in January or February in the middle of winter in Russia? So, people in the comment section who are familiar with how you would clean or repair an oil refinery, it involves high temperatures and steam. You then have technicians actually go into the distillation towers. And I just don't imagine that Russia can get any of this back online prior to this summer. So this is a delayed effect. What is going to be the outcome? You're not going to immediately see the benefits on the battlefield. But Russia's economy was already under extreme duress prior to all these oil refinery attacks. And I do believe over the coming months, we're going to feel it in global oil and energy prices. But whatever we're experiencing in the West, they're going to feel 10 times worse effects inside of Russia.
So, how has Russia reacted to these strikes that Ukraine has been carrying out on the oil industry? Have we seen them picking up the strikes, doing more of them, that is, within Ukraine, or have we seen them take out their rage on the battlefield? What's changed?
So the intensity of the attacks actually has been going down. I do think that Russia was conserving their strength for a winter offensive of some kind. What their goals were, I don't know. When you look at the battlefields, yes, they've recently captured, I think, the center of Chasiv Yar. There's a couple other villages in Donetsk where they've been trying to capture for 2 years now, and they finally have. But Russia is not going to win this war by capturing tree lines and wheat fields and completely demolish cities. There's no people, there's no standing structures, there's no economic benefit aside from the resources under the ground, which is probably one of the original motivations for this war for Putin. So Russia's reaction can really just be what they've been doing for 3 years: terrorism, indiscriminately bombing civilians and going after Ukraine's energy infrastructure, their thermal power plants and their energy connecting nodes. What else can Russia do that they haven't already been doing the last 3 years? And I don't know. If Putin is holding back anything, then if you're a Russian soldier who's been in the trenches for 3 years, you got to be pretty furious that there's more your government could be doing and they're choosing not to. So I don't believe that's happening. I don't believe that Putin is going to use nuclear weapons. Prior to Donald Trump being sworn in, it was all about Orshnik, World War III, I'm going to nuke you, I'm going to nuke you. And now that there's peace talks coming up in which Donald Trump will be some kind of arbiter or mediator, we don't know what he's going to do. The Russians don't know what he's going to do. And it's been fascinating seeing the reaction on Kremlin state TV. The commentators on Russian television are genuinely concerned and confused. Now, this is what Donald Trump has always done. Never speak directly about what you're actually going to do. Toss out outlandish and crazy ideas just to get people's reactions. In general, cause chaos and confusion so that when he makes you a serious offer or deal, in some way you feel relieved and you're more willing to take it. I don't know. This is madman politics at the moment, and we're all experiencing it and getting live reactions together.
Jake, that's really interesting. Do you think that it's because Trump has taken office that the Ukrainians now are allowed to just target the oil refineries however they want? And where do you think Trump is going to take this as a whole? Do you think he is going to be able to persuade Putin into a peace deal? Or do you think that this is just going to go on for longer and longer and it's going to be forgotten by the White House?
Trump did put out a really harsh, negative Truth Social post about a week and a half ago, but he's really been quiet about Russia and Ukraine since then. Reporters do occasionally ask him, but he's not being forthcoming with the details. I think Trump is actually ignoring Russia at the moment. I think he genuinely is focused on other issues. He just put a bunch of tariffs on our closest allies, Canada and Mexico. He's getting into arguments with Colombia. So Trump's going to do whatever he wants to do. And concerning the Russians, they want these negotiations. They want these peace talks. They want to see if they can get at least some level of sanctions relief from Trump or the U.S. Treasury. And I think Ukraine is using this as an opportunity. I think the Trump administration is no longer concerned about escalation management. This was the policy under Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden. We can't antagonize the Russians too much. We can't allow Ukraine to antagonize the Russians too much because that would risk nuclear war. I don't see anybody in the Trump administration speaking this way. I don't think they care about it. I don't think they're entertaining this idea at all. In a way, this is a good thing. The United States, NATO, and the Western Alliance should not be intimidated by Russia's nuclear threats. I've been making the argument now for almost 3 years. My background in the Air Force, nuclear and missile operations officer, there's zero benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon anywhere on the battlefield. Obviously, if they attack a NATO country, that would be the end of Russia. So for 3 years, the Russians would love to use one. They've got 6,000. This is supposed to be their ace in the hole, but the current U.S. administration doesn't care, and they're not holding the Ukrainians back. So in a way, there's less micromanaging, and the gloves are coming off, and we're going to see what can Ukraine achieve if Washington, D.C. no longer cares about where the price of energy goes, if they no longer care about can Russia successfully get their exports out. There's a three-pronged attack currently happening. Can we increase sanctions from the G7, the EU, and the United States? Can Ukraine successfully knock off more of Russia's oil refining and oil producing capacity? And then this third angle about the supplies around the world. Donald Trump saying to OPEC, can you produce more? Can you bring the price of oil down to $45 a barrel? $45 a barrel is not possible. We achieved that during the COVID crash because global demand for energy fell to zero, basically. But yeah, this is fascinating that China and India, for the month of March, are putting their purchases of Russian oil on hold. Now, when you purchase oil, these are futures contracts. You're buying oil today for a delivery at some point in the future. And what China and India are signaling to the Russians, publicly they're saying, we're going to put purchases on hold and higher shipping costs, whatever. It's true. But I think India and China are mostly concerned about what is Donald Trump going to do? What's the U.S. Treasury Department going to do as far as increased sanctions on Russia's oil majors and their shadow fleet? I think we should. And I think Trump's new Treasury Secretary is in favor of this. So I think Trump is kind of icing out the Russians. He's giving them the cold shoulder at the moment to let them reflect on this, that more damage can be done, both kinetically and economically to their economy. And Russia and China are not going to do, China and India are not going to do Russia any favors. They're not going to violate US sanctions to continue purchasing oil. So they've put on hold purchases for March. What will they do in April? What will they do in May? I don't know. I don't think any of the world's major economies knows what's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 months.
So certainly India and China not buying Russian oil will be a huge damage to the Russian economy. But that's not the only thing going wrong for the Russian economy right now. You've seen recently, there's been a lot of problems in the banking sector in Russia, and it seems that the debt situation is simply getting out of control. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
So, yes, this broke about a week and a half ago. There was this former executive for Bank of America and Morgan Stanley who published an analysis on Substack. But basically, we just learned that Putin has been funding this war through preferential loans to private defense companies. So the Kremlin has been telling private Russian banks, you have to loan money to our defense companies so they can continue producing for this war. Over the last 3 years, we thought the magic number was 250 billion. Russia, from the state treasuries, has spent about 250 billion to fight this war, but that's not true. The actual number is closer to 500 billion, and private corporate debt in Russia is now exceeding $400 billion. For the US economy, that might not feel like a lot, but the Russian economy, their GDP is close to 2 trillion. So private corporate debt in Russia is now accumulating to 20% of their GDP. That doesn't even count, the national debt. Yeah, this is what's triggering inflation. This is why Russia's central bank has to raise rates to 21% and hold them there. And they want to go higher. There's a internal dispute amongst Russia's elites. Putin's inner circle are fighting amongst themselves. This is wild to see. Soloveyov nightly on Kremlin state TV attacking Russia's central bank chief because ordinary Russians are outraged about inflation, about the cost of living. Yes, if you're a soldier in the SMO, your wife and kid, they're going to get a $2,000 check a month. But that $2,000 in rubles becomes worth less every single day as the cost of groceries, as the cost of rent or whatever continues to go up in Russia. So this is fascinating. What will happen when a financial collapse occurs? And it's inevitable. When you're borrowing money to make the principal and interest payments on your borrowed money, eventually you can't do this anymore. We don't know how much more time Russia's defense industry has. How much more time does Russia's private banks have? When we talk about Putin's oligarchs, on paper, they're billionaires because they own equity in these banks, equity in these defense companies, equity in these industries. But if they all have a financial crisis and collapse at the same time, it's Putin's oligarchs. It's his inner circle who are going to be wiped out. It's their billions in equity in these companies that they have to lose. I imagine that concerns them, but this is how Putin maintains control through threat and intimidation. And right now, he's promising everything to everyone. He's promising the oligarchs, the equity in your company is fine. I'll repay these debts once we win the war. He's making promises to the people that the end is near when it's not. These wars are never going to end. And yeah, as far as his allies, these alliances that the Kremlin has tried to build over the last 10 years, he's losing all of them. He's lost Syria. He's showing weakness in Transnistria, in Georgia, in Serbia. Belarus just had an election, and unfortunately, the people just didn't feel like they were going to receive any support if they took action against Lukashenko. So Belarus is staying out of it, but in other countries that are not currently being occupied by the Russian military, Russia's going to lose some allies this year, I think.
That's absolutely true, Jake. A lot has been going on recently, especially with the international partners of Russia. It seems they just can't count on them. I've heard recently that North Korean troops which had been sent to Russia to help invade Ukraine, were being pulled off the front lines. Have you also heard that? What's your analysis?
These North Korean troops have been fighting in the Kursk region now for, I think, almost 2 months. And the casualty reports are pretty high. 4,000, 5,000. Estimates are between 30 and 50% of these North Korean troops have been killed or wounded. And I think the Russians are trying to reevaluate how do they want to use these North Koreans. They've been mostly used for meat assaults so that regular Russian forces can then flank from the sides after the North Koreans are sent charging across open fields to die. Perhaps there's a better use for them. So I think there is an analysis and a revaluation happening. Perhaps there was this period of use that the North Koreans wanted first, and then Kim Jong Un can get his status reports. Generals can then reassess their partnership with the Russians. Do they want to pull them out, pull them back, or do they want to escalate? Do they want to send another 10,000, 20,000, 30,000? Kim Jong Un is doing this for money. None of these North Korean soldiers in Russia are receiving their paychecks. Their families in Pyongyang aren't receiving the paychecks. Kim Jong Un is getting the money. But at the same time, when you're a dictator in an authoritarian regime, it's all about maintaining your status and control at home. Now, I don't think the Kim regime is currently being weakened, but what if Russia does destabilize over the next 6 months? North Korea does share a border with Russia. Additionally, their main sponsor is China, and I think North Korea always has to take into account what does China think and feel about the Russians, given their proximity. And there's also Iran. Iran is Russia's other main military supporter. I'm sure the Russians would have welcomed Iranian soldiers to the front lines at any point in the last 3 years, and the Iranians have always told them no. So Iran themselves, I think they're sweating bullets, given that Donald Trump has always had a hostile opinion of Iran and been in favor of increasing sanctions, been in favor of going after their military assets in order to protect and secure Israel. So it's not looking great for Russia's main allies, military allies, and the neutral third parties. We talked about China and India. What are they going to do? How are they going to react? And I wish I could give you more predictions. I wish I could give you more certainty. But in my opinion, uncertainty and chaos is probably going to favor Ukraine. I don't see Ukraine's main core supporters in Europe abandoning them anytime soon. And Russia is crawling on their knees. When you look at the state of their forces going into combat and just all of the weird Mad Max vehicles and 3 different videos I saw last week of literal crutch battalions, injured Russian soldiers on crutches being sent into combat to die for nothing. And this is incredibly demoralizing for Russian military bloggers. It's been interesting seeing their reactions as well, but I wish I had more certainty for you, Jason, but we're going to see how this plays out together over the next couple months.
So, Jake, it does not sound like things are going very well between the entire brigades of soldiers descended in on crutches and a banking situation that's just getting worse and worse. It seems that things are just not going to get better anytime soon for Russia. How do you think this plays out for Russia as a whole? Or how about for Vladimir Putin himself? Where is this all leading?
Can I say heads on pikes? Yeah. Eventually, the Russian people have an extremely high level of tolerance for pain and misery. That's been the story of the Russian people for centuries. I forget the joke or who said it, but the story of Russia is always, and then it got worse. And Russia had a golden opportunity with the collapse of the Soviet Union to reinvent themselves, to make real democratic reforms. They're blessed with abundant natural resources, and they've had brilliant people help them in the past, their economy and their military. But this concentration of power in the Kremlin, the corruption, the KGB and the mafia basically took over the state with Putin in 1999, and they've never let it go. And it's just gotten worse and worse. But it's a house of cards. And these people are corrupt and incompetent. And I have to believe that there's cosmic justice in this universe. And after everything the Russians have done, they'll get what's coming to them.
We can certainly hope so. Jake, great chatting with you as always.
Thanks for having me, Jason.